The Collector of Antiques on 52 Church Street hosts a wide variety of African artworks. The origins of African art lie way before recorded history. At the beginning of the 20th century, Modigliani, Picasso, Van Gogh and Gauguin were all inspired by the well-organized and creative images portrayed in African art. We now go to the Collectors of Antiques gallery to see what African art is all about. Colin, can you give us a brief history of African art?
Well, I think African art history started when anthropologists and missionaries went out to Africa. Part of it, I think, the missionaries went because the government wanted to find out if the indigeni were cannibals or not. So they sent the missionaries out. In the early 20th century, African art was viewed by certain collectors at that time as a different form of art, and they staged an exhibition in Paris. And that exhibition in Paris drew such acclaim from people no less than Picasso, Vlaminck, all the great early 20th century artists. And in African art they saw a different form, which gave them ideas to follow in their art, and Cubism was born. African arts probably had one of the great influences of what we know as 20th century art.
Who are the main buyers of African art and who is the target market?
Well, I'd love South Africans to be my main target because they're right here. But I found that probably my main target are Europeans, particularly Belgians and French citizens. The Americans are very big buyers, as are the Germans. Part of it, I think, is because the French colonized in Africa and retained an interest as a result, as did the Belgians. The whole of the Congo was yet a province of Belgium. The Americans didn't colonize, but they somehow caught up with African art in the 50s. The Germans were very instrumental in collecting and have wonderful museums and many collectors. The British, not so much. They just plundered the Benin bronzes, which are very famous, and they have a wonderful museum of African art in England, but there are not many dealers or collectors of African art in England, funnily enough. Unfortunately, in South Africa, where we live in Africa, people aren't aware of what we call African tribal art. I'm not quite sure, perhaps our history of our nation made us unaware of African art being important, being beautiful, being marvelous, being art.
How expensive is African art?
Well, it can be. And where we get the prices on African art items are through catalogues. You know, Sotheby's, famous name, Christie's, famous name, they regularly hold African art auctions in Paris and in America. And if you look at the prices, it's quite astounding. The year before last, I sold some items on an auction sale in Paris, and I got prices I would never dream of getting in South Africa. And we tend to get, because African art is international, it's art, depending on what it is. I mean, some artifacts go for very little, but then artifacts, a mask sold 2 years ago for almost 6 million euros. A little headrest from the Congo sold 2 years ago for 1.5 million euros. So if you multiply that by 10 or 13, you get an idea of price. But it doesn't have to be prohibitive. You know, it's like art. If you buy a painting, you can buy a painting that costs millions, and you can buy a painting that costs 1,000. So it depends what the item is, and its rarity, and its sculptural qualities.
The Gallery of the Collector of Antiques can be found at 62 Church Street, and everything from this Mboko from the Congo to this fertility sword from Nigeria can be found here. The Collector of Antiques hosts a wide range of African artworks. So next time you're in Church Street, it's worth taking a trip down to the Collector of Antiques to see these wonderful African pieces for yourself.